Start recording. Recording started. So today we're gonna cover a chapter, hopefully all in one day. Usually we take a couple of weeks to do that. Let me switch to our presentations. Okay. Relatively short chapter, some lessons from financial history. Okay. So just a couple of lessons. Basically, the lessons are about risk and return. The lessons are about risk and return. First lesson is that everything is risky. Okay, everything is risky. Everything is risky, right? But in order to make any sort of return, you have to take on risk. You have to bear risk. To bear risk is to hold risk. Can I just, instead of particular presentation, just show entire screen, right? Select window or screen, entire screen. Just like this. In this case, I'll be kind of more flexible to switch between apps quicker, right? Do we see anything here? Right. So what if I switch here quickly? Say we want to have a look at some examples of anything. Say McDonald's. Relatively stable company. Turn it into a line. Do you guys see a chart in front of you? Does this work?
Yes, we can see the chart.
Okay, so
Yes.
everything is risky, right? So for example, if we look at the beginning of 2022, let's say, or the second half of 2022, investing into relatively stable companies such as McDonald's was still risky, right? Going from the very beginning of 2022 into March of 2022, McDonald's was down by about 18%, right? Of course, since then, the price has recovered, right? But in order to enjoy any of this sort of price recovery, any sort of this reward, right? Investment returns, you have to take on risk. Right? Sometimes whatever you invest into goes down, like over here during the pandemic drop. McDonald's, together with a lot of things, dropped a lot. The general stock market has actually dropped by about 50% during the pandemic, while McDonald's dropped by less than that, by around 38%. Because it's a relatively stable company in an industry where people will always need to eat. If you compare this to another relatively well-known big company, I don't know, if you open Tesla or if you open Apple, if you open Amazon or stuff like that, I'm pretty sure that during the pandemic those companies dropped much more, because during the pandemic, during the recession, people are going to cut down on their purchases of Apple or their purchases of technology. They will still need to eat, right? So if we compare this with Apple, for example, for some reason it's out of the screen. New price scale. Okay, if we compare it with Apple, Apple dropped from what, $80, $81 down to $56. Actually, Apple didn't drop that much, only by about 30%, 31%, yes, during the pandemic. Well, I guess my expectation was not right. Anyway, the first lesson is that with reward comes risk, okay? And the second lesson is that usually the relationship between risk and reward is such that with greater risk comes greater reward. For example, let's look at this Apple, or let's look at this McDonald's, and on average, whatever is the average annual return, I don't know, right? You could calculate this, just look at how much on average the share price goes up every year. You can easily calculate that. Just for example, just let's throw in some numbers here. On average per year, 10% higher, let's say, right? On average per year, 10% higher for stable companies such as McDonald's. Even if there is a recession, people still need to eat, okay? So on average, let's say 10% returns with McDonald's per year. And you have a choice of investing your money into either McDonald's with 10% average return, or this other small company that nobody has heard about, which also promises an average 10% return per year. Okay. Perhaps the risk that this company that nobody has heard about, it's a very small, young company, perhaps the risk that it goes out of business is much higher than the risk that McDonald's goes out of business, right? So which company would you invest into, McDonald's or this newcomer? You guys, tell me, McDonald's or newcomer? Anyone? Angela? Nemo?
Professor,
Ricky?
I think McDonald's.
Right. Ricky, how about you?
Oh, sorry, Professor. What did you say? Can you tell me again? I know newcomers and McDonald's. So what about?
So what we're looking at is at this second lesson. The relationship between risk and return is such that with greater risk comes a greater return. In order to enjoy a greater return, you have to take higher risk. For example, if you have a choice of investing either into McDonald's or some newcomer that nobody has heard about, higher risk that a newcomer goes out of business, and both promise 10% return, which company you choose to invest into, McDonald's or newcomer?
I think McDonald's.
Okay, Maureen, how about you?
Professor, I'm Jenny, and I think I also choose McDonald's.
Very good. We all choose McDonald's because the risks are much lower, but the return is the same, right? So in order for a small company, in order for a newcomer, in order to more risky company to attract the investments, right? In order for them to attract capital, they have to promise a high return, right? They have to promise a high return. Otherwise, no capital will flow there, right? Just from examples of what you guys choose, right? So, hence, this second lesson, okay, from history. Firstly, no return comes without risk. Whatever you invest into is risky, right? We have some exception for that, theoretically, right? But anyway, whatever you invest into is risky, even if you choose relatively stable companies in a food industry where we all eat all the time, even if there is a recession. Even McDonald's goes down by 30% during a pandemic, right? So everything is risky. But on the other hand, the greater the risk, the greater is potential reward. Otherwise, without higher reward, smaller companies would simply not attract any capital. If they promised same amount of reward, same amount of return as the more established, less risky companies, those newcomers will not get any capital, right? So this return from your investment actually consists of a couple of things, right? So tell me guys, what are the ways for you to acquire cash as a result of your investment? So let's say, for example, you have some extra cash, you invest it into, I don't know, whatever, McDonald's, into Netflix, into Amazon, into Apple. Hold it for 1 or 2 to 3 years. Now you plan to buy that nice new car. How are you going to get the money out of your investments? What are the possibilities? Anyone? So you are still holding those shares.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So as a result of your investment, what is the cash flow that you can get back? Say you invested into a range of companies 1 or 2 or 3 years ago. By now you've got nice returns, share prices have increased, perhaps you've also got other payments. Now you want to spend that money on that nice new car. How are you going to actually get the cash out of your investment? What are the possibilities? The answer is too obvious. Maybe that's why you are a little shy to say it. But well, you hold the shares, right? You hold that Nvidia, Amazon, whatever, all those companies, McDonald's, right? You're holding them. You want to get a car instead. What are you gonna do?
Sell in the store.
Yes, one is selling the stock. If you sell for higher than you bought it for, that will be capital gains, right? So one way of acquiring returns from your investment is capital gains. But there are actually two ways. Any other source of return for you guys as a result of investing?
Dividends.
Exactly. This is what I was trying to get into. So now we'll jump into the details of this return, right? And actually return consists of two portions. The total return consists of two portions. One is dividends and second is capital gains. That's for shares, that's investing into equity. Similar idea works also for bonds because bonds pay coupon payments. Okay. So because coupon payments and dividends are usually periodic payments, these are part of income, and capital gains are part of part of capital gains. That's a separate category. Okay. So that's total return consisting of dividends and capital gains. And if you express this as percentages, dividends as percentage of the total amount of money you invested originally, and capital gains as percentage of total amount of money you invested originally, those have names as well, which would be dividend yield. Okay, dividend yield is dividend paid per year divided by the original price that you paid for the share. Here's the formula at the top. And capital gains yield. The word yield indicates that it's going to be in percentages. Okay.
I'm sorry, Professor.
Yep.
You haven't shared the screen yet.
Really? Do you guys not see the formulas? Oh, I see.
No.
Oh, right. Thank you. Okay. Here. So total return, as you guys helped me to figure out, consists of dividend or the income stream and the capital gains, right? And if we divide each of these by the original price of the shares that you pay for by the original investment, those ratios have names as well, which are dividend yield. That's the ratio of total dividends per year divided by the price of the share that you paid a year ago. You see, here we have T plus 1. Here we have just T. And if you divide your capital gains, that's the difference between the new price and the old price, by the price of the original price, that will give you capital gains in percentages with the name of capital gains yield. Okay, so basically it's those same returns in percentages, right? Total return in percentages is going to be dividend yield plus capital gains yield. But of course, capital gains might be negative. If the new price is lower than the old price, your capital gains yield is negative, right? And also for dividends, if dividends are paid quarterly, that's 4 times per year. Remember, we always look at an annual basis, so we need to add up all the annual dividends, 4 of the quarterly dividends, to calculate dividend yield. So let's say, for example, you bought, let's say McDonald's for $200, held it for 1 year, and it paid $1 every quarter. Dividend yield is $4. That's total annual payout divided by the original investment of $200. 4 divided by 200. In this case, dividend yield is 2%. Okay, just as an example. Right? Very simple, all simple ideas. Right? Here are more examples. We're gonna skip through that because we're gonna move on to more details of this second lesson, the relationship between risk and return. As we've just mentioned, usually higher return is accompanied by higher risk. Higher return is accompanied by higher risk. So let's look at these government bonds. Okay, the return from government bonds. In many countries, these sort of bonds are called government bonds. In US, they use a special name for that. I'm not sure why. Traditionally, treasury bills. Treasury bills is basically what other countries call short-term government bonds. Okay. These are short-term government bonds and they are relatively low-risk investment. Actually, in finance, theoretically, we say that short-term government bonds or treasury bills have zero risk. Because even if the government doesn't have any money to pay you back, they can always just print money and give it back to you. So theoretically, we say that it's kind of zero risk, but if you really try to fantasize a little bit, I could imagine that tomorrow, I don't know, aliens invade the Earth, destroy everyone on Earth, and even the short-term treasury bills will not pay out any returns. But that's not a very likely scenario. So generally, in finance, we call these short-term government bonds zero-risk investments. Okay. And looking at the historical returns going back for 100 years, back to early 20th century, 1925, right? The returns change anywhere from 0% up to about 14%, but on average maybe somewhere around 3 to 4%. 3 to 4% return on short-term government bonds. Because the risks are so low, the returns are also relatively low. Compare that to investing into companies. Here are the returns from investing into large companies. It's much more risky because sometimes you can lose a lot. You see over here in 2009, during the global financial crisis, average returns were about negative 40%. So a lot of people lost money. Very risky. Right? But overall, throughout history, average returns are much higher, not 3% as for short-term government bonds, but average, if you calculate all of these columns, there are many more blue columns compared to red columns, so the average is perhaps somewhere around 10%, perhaps even a slightly higher. So higher risk with investing into these companies, but also higher return compared to short-term government bonds. And if you compare that, and do I have smaller companies here? On a different chart. If you compare that to investing into smaller companies are even more risky, right? But the returns are generally higher as well, right? But the risk is also high. There's also high chance to lose a lot. Like blue line here, for example, is investing into large companies. Whereas the red line is investing into small companies. Over here, in 1970s, for example, when all of the stock market came down, large companies didn't come down as much as the small companies. Right? So the risks are higher with small companies, but the red line generally climbs steeper, as you see, than the blue line. So yes, much higher risks. If things go down, you lose a lot with small company investments. But if things don't go sour, if things don't go poorly, then generally this steepness of the red line is higher. So returns are generally higher, but also very, very high risks. So these are all examples for this second lesson. High risk comes with high return. More examples. Here's short-term government bonds. On average, over the last 100 years, short-term government bonds, a return of around 3.8%. Right? Large company stocks, on average over the last 100 years, a return of around 12%. Small company stocks, a return of over 16%. Right? So high risks, of course, but accompanied with high return. Okay. Inflation 3%. So with zero risk investment, 3.8% return, almost all of the return is actually eaten up by the investment. Okay. So talking about the return, there are different ways of calculating this return over the years. Let's jump into Excel. Now let's start with some examples, numerical examples. That'll be helpful for the test. Oh, by the way, this reminds me, talking about the test, talking about Moodle, let me jump back to Moodle. Right now we are in week 8. First thing about Moodle I want to remind you is next week is our midterm exam. Next week is midterm exam. Don't be late. You will have only 2 hours to go to Moodle, download the Excel file. The Excel file will become available at 10 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. You'll have a deadline until 12 o'clock to upload your Excel answers back to Moodle. Okay, so that's one thing I want to tell you about Moodle. And the second thing is, last week in week 7, we have a forum over here. If you click in, okay, and click into this topic of the forum, scenario and sensitivity, there is a question, and I would like you to answer this question. This helps you to share your opinion with the rest of the class. Okay? That's also required by the Ministry of Education, so that there is more communication amongst all of us. Okay? So if you haven't done so, please answer this question in your own words. Okay? So far we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only 8 students answered this question. Forums are also graded. Okay? Forum answers are also graded. So I'll keep this forum open for maybe another week or 2 to give you a chance to share your opinion. That's all graded. You gotta do that. Okay. Now coming back to our Excel, some examples which will be helpful to answer this test. Today after class you still have your test with the deadline at 2 p.m. Okay, so till 2 p.m. All right. Now, what did we look at? Just to remind you what we're looking at different ways of calculating average returns. There are actually different ways. You are already familiar with that from statistics, but to remind you, let's have a look at years and returns. Starting from, say, 2010. Let's have a look at a number of years here. 2 more, back to last year. And let's have some returns here. I need some random numbers. Say, maybe I'll just choose something by myself. So, because I need small numbers for returns in percentages, say, then 15, 16, if I remember correctly, weren't that good. So say, for example, negative 6%, negative 4%. Ah, 2020 was really bad. That's the pandemic year, yes? So 2017, okay, that's all right. So 2020 pandemic, lost a lot. Say negative 28%, for example. Okay. Let's say something like this. One way of calculating the average of all of these returns is, is a simple average. Simple average. Another name for that is arithmetic average. So you already know how to do that. Equals sum of all of these numbers, right? Divided by how many of them there are. That's 13 years. 13 years. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13 years. Count this, it's going to be 13. So on average, if you look at the simple average, you are making about 5.6% return. Another way is simply equals average enter these numbers, that's going to be the same number here. 5.6% return on average per year, right? But there's a bit of a problem with this average return. There's a bit of a problem with this average return. To illustrate the problem, let's have a look at another simple example. Let's say you start with a $1,000 investment. Your initial investment is $1,000, and let's say in 2020, your returns are negative 28%, and in 2021, your returns are positive 28%. How much is the average of negative 28 and positive 28? The average is, of course, 0, right? Is that right? Yes or no? I think it is. So, 0 return on average. 0 return on average. Just simply looking at this simple arithmetic average, it looks like by the end of these 2 years, you should still have $1,000. Because on average, you have 0% return. You start with 1,000, finish with 1,000. But in reality, you are not going to have $1,000. Let's see how much money you will have. Money by year end, if you lose 28% of $1,000, you will have equals 1,000 times 1 minus 0.28. This is how much you will have by the end of 2020. Let's put a multiplication sign here. You will have $720. And in the next year, if this $720 grows by 28%, you have a positive return of 28%. It's going to be 720 times 1.28. You're only up to $922. You're still above 1,000. You are still below $1,000. You actually have lost, even though your average return, if you just simply look at the simple average, is 0%, right? By the end of 2021, you have less amount of money than you started with, okay? This illustrates the problem of this simple average. This example suggests that you haven't made any money and you haven't lost any money, because simple average tells us you have 0% return on average, but in reality you lost money. In reality you lost money. For that reason, there is another way to calculate your average returns. And that is geometric mean. Or another name for that is geomean. Geometric mean or geomean. And the formula, I was going to write down the formula, but we have a formula here in the slides. Let me find it. Geometric average return. Geometric average return, or geomean, is actually the product of all your returns plus 1. Of all your returns plus 1 per year. It's a product or multiplication of all your returns plus 1 into the power of, let's zoom in a little, into the power of square root of number of years minus 1. Okay, let's write it down in Paint just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So your geomean, right, is, let's get a brush here, a root, and it's not a square root, it's actually a root of a number of years. A root of multiplication of all your returns in every year, in the first year, in the second year, and so on, until all the years of your investment, and plus 1. 1 plus those returns, okay? And outside the root, after all of that, we have minus 1 to take out the original investment, to only see how much is the actual return besides the original investment, okay? So this is the formula, maybe a little bit easier to understand, with a root into the power of n rather than the power of 1 over n. Anyway, let's have a look at an example. If we look at this simple example, right, what we need to do is we need to first create this 1 plus r column. So to go step by step, I'll just call it 1 plus equals 1 plus the return, and copy that. Okay. Then I multiply them. You see we have multiplication here. So equals this times this, right? Then I take the power of 1 over number of years. In this case, it's only 2. So equals this number into the power of 1 over number of years, which is 2. Right? And then I subtract 1 to take out the original investment. Equals 1 minus this. So I actually lost around 4%. Trying to see how much exactly did I lose. This button is covering some other button here, so this is what we're going to see. Yeah, exactly 4%. I've actually lost 4%, right? Oh, I'm sorry, not 1 minus that, it's that minus 1. Yeah, I've actually lost 4%. Yeah, actually lost 4%. So, a little bit more accurate to show us whether we have actually lost money or not. Okay. So far so good. Any questions? More examples after the break. Question time.
Professor, can you show me the formula, because I cannot, my connection is not good, so I cannot keep up with the.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Where was the formula here? Make it smaller.
You haven't shared the screen yet.
Oh, am I not? Thank you for reminding me. Where is it? Green. Okay. So the formula, here's the formula. It's a product of all the 1 plus returns into the power of 1 over the number of years, then minus 1. Alternatively, here's the formula. It's a product of all 1 plus r returns, right, into the power of 1 over number of years, because x into the power of 1 over n is the same as root of n of x, right? And then minus 1. So after the break, we'll have another example. For example, over here, how to calculate geometric average, geomean. For now, here's the formula. Or as in the slides, you already have this on Moodle. The slides are already on Moodle. Good? More questions?
No, can you show us the formula on Excel file?
Oh, I see. All right. In the Excel file. So, several steps. First, I want to create this column for 1 plus the returns, right?
You're not sharing the screen?
Oh, right, thanks. Screen. So, there are several steps. First, I want to create this column for 1 plus those returns. That's 1 plus the return I have over here. Right? Then, I want to multiply all of those numbers, right? According to the formula here, that's a multiplication of all the 1 plus the returns. So that's simply multiplication of these 1 plus the returns. Then I take a power. Then I take a power of 1 over the number of years. So I take this into the power of 1 over a number of years. In this case, there are only 2 years. right? And then I subtract 1 from all of that. So I subtract 1 from all of that. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
So, I think we can go for a break. Otherwise, any more questions? Okay. So, Google, if I'm not mistaken, allows us only 1 hour for these Google Meets. We're nearly at an hour, I guess. Anyway, not enough for another section after the break. So I'm gonna stop the meeting now, and in another 10-15 minutes after the break, I will post a new link on Moodle. See you soon.